mean, it's such an intense role. Not only is she having to act, there's a camera spinning around her, and then when she's not physically doing it, you're uptight and she's giving intense close-ups. Can you talk about working with her and how it had to be exhausting for her to perform that?
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, one of the, beyond everything she did in the film, one of the great accomplishments that I think she did is to be able to act and dance at the same time. It's just really hard to do because the choreography was really challenging and difficult, and the physicality was often bordering on painful. I mean, standing up, on 2 toes on a wooden block, on an unforgiving floor, even if you're at 90 pounds, is still really painful. And often she had to act against what she was doing because she's struggling with the Black Swan dance, and so she's not performing it like a sexual predator. She's being terrified and scared, and so she had to play against what she was doing physically in a lot of ways, and that's just really hard. And then because technically we weren't just blocking the camera down and just doing it. The only thing that could go wrong wasn't just her the dance. It was also we could fuck up with the camera, which happens, of course. So there were a lot of takes, take after take after take, of trying to pull it off. And most of the dance sequences that she does, I'd say we probably on average 15 takes or so to do it. So it was brutal, and they're long takes. I mean, you're talking about 15 takes, and it's those long shots that I was, it was important for me to do it in one take to prove to the audience that it was Natalie dancing and that we weren't just cutting away and, creating an illusion. We wanted the audience to see that she could, maintain a dance for that long, and because she was capable of doing it.
Every review you read, it always says it's this film meets this film. It's this film meets this film. It's really such a unique film in a way. It's hard to stick in a genre. So I was just wondering, was it always having there's a lot of melodrama to it. Was that from the get-go in there? And were you ever afraid how far you could push it in the script? How big you could get with the characters without it losing the thriller aspect?
I mean, it's funny because there's been a whole question of what's intentional in the movie and if the tone is intentional. But if you look at all my movies, they're all fucking over the top. And it's like, all my characters are, ridiculously insane. And it's kind of what I've been attracted to always. It's like, oh, the Ellen Burstyn character, now that's realism. What are you talking about? There's a refrigerator chasing her in the kitchen. I mean, come on. So, this whole thing, like I'm not in control of the tone, I've been like, okay, fine, then I'm not in control at all. But I don't know, I mean, you should talk a little bit. We talked a lot about tone, and we were aware we were playing with genre a lot. And, we knew we were doing, as we called them, the cheap thrills, or cheap scares, whenever you get the audience go, whoop, like that, or something pops out. We wanted to, because it's fun, my mentor, Stuart Rosenberg, would say you gotta make them laugh, cry, or scare the shit out of them. And this was definitely an exercise in the scaring the shit out of them. So me and Andy,
we looked at a lot of different horror movies or sections of horror movies just to see what people.
I made him make a list of cut together a sequence of every single mirrored scare gag ever done on film, which is a really good. We should actually put that up on the internet. But then we came up with that, and then we all sat down together and said, how can we reinvent the mirrored gag and make it a little bit more original?
I mean, one of the things that I think we looked at when we were in the editing process, when we looked at our first assembly and talked about tone, or kind of around tone, is that the film kind of opens as a drama in a lot of ways, and then at a certain point when she starts to lose her grip and Sandy spills over, the movie goes nuts. So how do you build towards that correctly and establish that tone so that it's earned and that it makes some sense and that you follow that train of thought with her journey. So that means playing with all different kinds of things, performance and sound design and music and visual effects. And a big part of what we looked at with the scares and the mirror scares is that, and other scares, is that they don't always need to be underlined or big shocks or moments or jolts. There's a lot of creep in the film, a lot of organic little tweaks hidden here and there throughout any given shot in the film. And the idea of that is just to keep things off balance, not necessarily to announce itself as some big horror moment. So that by the time it all culminates, you're ready for it.
There's a lot of the dwarf with the red cloak and Don't Look Now in this thing.
But I also wonder where that shot where you're following her, there's this kind of fear that someone's following her through the whole thing. Was that from the beginning? Did you guys come up with that shot and want to use it through the whole thing, or did you discover that, or where did that take place?
I think it came from the rest of it. The film, originally when Darren and I first started speaking about it, he had the idea of having this film be an accompaniment film to that film. So if you look at that, it had that sort of Darden Brothers vibe with the camera, following the characters and staying with those characters. And I think that shot just comes from that. And then I think what makes it extra special is its exact symmetry. And it's something Darren's always been interested in, composition and symmetry. So having her right in the center of frame and seeing the world go by from her eyes essentially was the inspiration for it.
It comes from, it's funny, Mickey can do so much with his body, and in fact, to talk about Stuart again, Stuart Rosenberg, he's a director, directed Cool Hand Luke, and he was my teacher when I was in film school, and he directed Mickey in the Pope of Greenwich Village, actually. And I remember him talking about when Mickey gets dumped by Daryl Hannah, for anyone who remembers the film, and he walks out the door, he doesn't turn around, and he does something with his back before he exits. And he taught us about that moment. So when it was my chance to work with Mickey, I talked to Mickey a lot about that, and that sort of developed the idea of doing something off of his back. And then I was really there were a lot of connections between the two films thematically, and I was never afraid of that because I thought it was cool, because you can't really get more different than Mickey Rourke versus Natalie Portman. It's like the two ends of the spectrum of characters, especially a ballet dancer versus a wrestler. Yet there are so many connections between the two occupations that I thought it was just interesting, and then I kind of wanted to connect them visually in style. But we were all really nervous for a long time if you could do a film handheld that was ultimately a horror film, and we looked for examples, and we couldn't really find any examples. And at some point, Maddie and I just turned to each other and said, "Fuck it, let's try it." And it was a big gamble if we could do it. And I think one of the things we talked about that we knew we were going to get as a gift out of it was that for people who didn't know what they were walking into, the first half of the film would feel like a documentary because it had that handheld cinema verite feel, and also because we were establishing the ballet world, which had a lot of details, we thought they would get that. And then suddenly, why that peeling the cuticle off of her finger is so intense. Part of it, it's also really disgusting, but also you're not expecting it. You think you're watching one type of film, and then suddenly it takes a turn that's really extreme. And that was just an added bonus of the handheld style.
Was there a feeling that it was going to be hard to cut together? You're moving around so much with the camera. Was there? Was this all going to get together, or is it going to be on different sides? Was that?
We're always planning what our cut points are. Like we'll be like, this shot leads to that shot, so we need to end over here, and then pick up the next shot there. So that's always a conversation.
At least, certainly during the dance material, that's at least a conversation where the camera's moving around the most in terms of that. And we had video stuff that you guys shot that we cut together just to kind of feel out what we needed to do in a very compressed period of time. So.
And we can talk about the other two actors for a little bit. Barbara Hershey, that role is so juicy, that hasn't existed hardly since the 50s or 60s, that great role. And Vincent Cassell, who's so effortless, he's unbelievable. Can you talk a little bit about those two actors and how you got them?
Well, Barbara took something that could have very easily gone very one-dimensional, and is often very one-dimensional in those movies that you talk about. And we worked hard on the script to make it, have a lot of facets and be able to be played both ways. And then she walked the line every day. She added depth and complexity to the character. So you don't really know if she's a good guy or a bad guy, which is, both characters come out of the ballet. She's based off of Rothbard, the demon who has captured the maiden and turned her into a swan.